Okay, Rob, thank you very much for joining me on the Security Space podcast today. What
Thank
we
you.
will be discussing is all about how to operationalize OSINT in the defense sector. But before we get into it, Rob, are you okay just to give the audience a little bit of an introduction to yourself, if that's okay?
Yes, absolutely. Thank you for having me, Nick. Yeah, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Rob. I currently work for Blackdot Solutions. We essentially provide a SaaS-based platform or a SaaS-based OSINT investigation tool for complex investigations, mainly to those people that are combating economic crime, but it has a lot of use cases outside of that as well. In my current role at Black Dot, I'm a customer success manager. So I need to ensure that clients get the most value they can out of the platform, that I can support them strategically with their goals and what they need and want from the platform, and then obviously any ongoing technical support that's required and contracts, etc. thereafter. Previously, I spent over 13 years in the Royal Air Force and have extensive experience in open source intelligence, mainly, I say mainly through the time of the Russian invasion of Ukraine. So just before the invasion to actually being there at the actually being in the team during the invasion, and then leaving the Air Force in 2023, I believe.
Okay, perfect. Well, thank you very much, Rob, and yeah, thanks for jumping on with us today. So, I suppose just to kind of jump straight in with it and throw you in the deep end a little bit from the off, Rob, is what does operationalized OSINT actually look like in the defense sector then?
I think what operationalized OSINT in the defense sector looks like and what it probably should be might be two slightly different things, but they are certainly on that journey. Um, I think what we're really trying to focus on here in terms of operationalizing OSINT is transforming vast amounts of intelligence or information, so open source information, and transforming that into actionable intelligence so that that intelligence can directly influence what senior decision makers need to obviously make decisions upon. And it's not necessarily about collecting more, it's about cutting through the noise so that you can provide that insight accurately and timely so that it makes a difference on the ground. Because ultimately, for defense, it is ultimately a matter between life and death. I think in order to do that, defense needs to integrate OSINT with the other intelligence disciplines, so your human, your SIGINT, etc., and not necessarily just be an afterthought or an addition. Okay, it is very much its own intelligence discipline that can really offer something to defense and obviously plenty of others.
Mm. Okay, okay. So I suppose I just want to take it one step back and be what is your sort of perception and maybe take me back to your time in the RAF when um your view the actual view on OSINT as a credible source of information because I might be wrong here, but like Orson maybe gets a bit of a disrespect in terms of like, oh, because it's publicly available, it's fine, it's not that much of a threat. I'm saying this deliberately quite naive, um, as opposed to like you say the morbid glamour of attaching sort of deep dark web information. Do you know what I mean? So what is the sort of view on OSINT and did you use it whilst in the RAF, I assume?
Yeah, I think it would be easy to say OSINT is the new kid on the block, but that's actually not true at all because you look at all publicly available information types, that's things from books, and books have been around for forever and all the way through to all the other different sources. But we see it a bit more of new school because of the World Wide Web. So, planes are planes. Obviously satellites are satellites, they're fantastic and they get better and faster at what they do and more clear and everything else. Whereas with the internet, it's always new. You've always got this rapidly evolving, you've got a tool that now does this, a tool that now does that. So we're trying to manipulate OSINT into the intelligence cycle.
Mm.
Now, OSINT absolutely has a place in every single part of the intelligence cycle, and just the same as every other intelligence source.
So to come in
And
on that, Rob, then how do you actually build it into the life cycle then?
so, I mean, we'll look at a few key phases. So, from a direction perspective, absolutely all intelligence needs to start with that direction. So, in defense, much like everywhere else, you had your CCIRs, your PIRs, your SIRs, and your EEIs. And that ensures that you remain aligned to whatever goal that you're looking at. And like I say, at the very high level, that might just be a country or a thing. Like, it doesn't matter. But then when you get to the nitty-gritty of the EIs, that is the specific little elements, those building blocks that create that page that you're then sort of delivering against. And like I say, the most critical part for OSINT, especially in my opinion, is the collection element. So before starting your collection, to make sure that you have an extremely watertight intelligence collection plan, because very quickly in OSINT, you've got vast amounts of data that can just be thrown on your screen. You type something into Google and you probably have 500 pages plus on something. So you need to make sure that one, you stay on point to what you're looking at, and two, make sure that you can obfuscate your obvious intent. If you want to go and look at person X, just typing in person X on Google and various other search engines doesn't quite cut it. You probably need to find a little bit of a thread that you can pull that then leads you into your individual so that you can continue to or maintain as less of a footprint as you possibly can.
Yeah. And I suppose what I want to sort of move on to is the sheer volume of noise that can sort of come from our sins because what I want to sort of lead you to is there's a lot of sort of double negatives. There's a lot of sort of mis and disinformation out there now. Information is absolutely rife now. Information is its own currency, and especially with social media now. Christ, look at the power that Elon Musk has. Look at how. I'm not saying Donald Trump solely got in from his Twitter presence, but it was certainly an appeal to maybe younger audiences that he can reach them as opposed to his opposition. Um, and I suppose what's even more relevant as well is even in the last 24, 48 hours, I don't know if you've seen Rob, but like Grok on Twitter has been like spewing out like anti-Semitic sort of like terminologies, all because Elon Musk doesn't want it to become woke. And it's like this sort of information now that is going out open source that is very, very dangerous to those that aren't sort of trained in understanding, okay, this is actually fake, this is actually propaganda, this is what it is. So I suppose in a roundabout way is like, how do we actually secure OSINT? How do we make it more streamlined? And how do we stop this wildfire that is sort of spreading on social medias at this moment in time?
I mean, it's only going to get more difficult, is my first thought. Obviously, AI plays a huge influence, and you look at AI now. A lot of people don't know what is and isn't AI. You see it all the time. You open sort of BBC News, and it's like, hey, is this picture AI generated? Is it not? So it's literally everywhere that you're looking. And I think one of the big things that I suppose was a bit of a shift to OSINT being taken more seriously, but also looking into this sort of mis and disinformation space was naturally the Russia Ukraine or the Russian invasion of Ukraine. A lot of people, like a lot of news now, learned of the invasion through social media. You know, on Twitter, on TikTok, or X, were the main ones at the time. And it quite quickly got to a point in defense where it was like, we need to keep people informed. How can we best do this? And the obvious answer is OSINT. But then you're also taking your higher classification materials and trying to create an OSINT overlay of that. And then you'll have seen it on certainly BBC News, was where I saw it all the time. But we had daily defense intelligence updates being provided to people multiple times a day. We were having to provide ministers information multiple times a day of what the current situation was. And ordinarily, you'd have weeks to maybe produce like information packs or intelligence packs in OSINT beforehand. This conflict meant that you quite often had hours, if not minutes, to get something to someone. And I mean, it raises a good question. Obviously, their defense intelligence felt the need to try and get ahead of mis and disinformation.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Could they have done it better? In hindsight, yeah, they could have done. You know, we're discussing operationalized OSINT now. So, with better operationalized OSINT, you can help combat mis and disinformation better, as well as AI is getting better, tooling is getting better. So you can, reverse image search things. Did that actually exist prior to wherever that picture says that it came from? As well as tools that enable you to pretty much build a plethora of data sources into one sort of single pane of glass to do your investigations. Something like Vidaris, for example. You can almost build an endless amount of data streams in there with its open API integration to trawl as far as you want in the World Wide Web.
Mm, mm.
And being able to overlay that with other information types at a higher classification, like you can do in defense, will only help bolster that anti-AI sort of sentiment
Yeah.
that obviously we're trying to combat here.
Yeah. And to come in on that one, and that segues perfectly. And I promise this isn't going to turn into a mis and disinformation. It's just there's a very nice parallel between the two worlds of that being OSINT as well. Is the the AI guardrails that simply aren't in place at this moment in time, and how dangerous that is. It's just you mentioned there with the what sort of tools and frameworks are in place to sort of help operationalize OSINT, but part of what is an absolute accelerator is AI, and like you say, these images that aren't necessarily real and these deepfake videos that have moved on from Will Smith eating spaghetti and his eyes all bulging out of his face and that. It's moved on from that. And I think that was only 2, 3 years ago, I think. I was shocked when I seen it, for numerous reasons. But yeah, there just isn't even an AI governance act in there. And I feel like I was doing a podcast, that's a few months ago now, with Andy Simpson from from Secure, and essentially what we were discussing is they are waiting for the first major incident to happen that is an AI related one, and therefore they can reverse engineer it. And I just think that's such a dangerous way to go about it. That seems to be how security moves, doesn't it? Let it happen, then we learn from it. But I don't even know what my question was with that one, Rob. But yeah, essentially around the tools, around the frameworks that can essentially help with operationalizing OSINT.
I think let's look at the frameworks first. So yeah, there's not a huge amount of governance out there, let alone AI. AI aside, that is the new kid on the block. But in terms of OSINT itself, there's no the UK, potentially the EU, but certainly the UK lacks any clear OSINT guidelines. The US, I believe it was earlier this year, published a national OSINT strategy
Okay.
that they have that offers a really good model for nations to essentially start to work from. Now, in defense, we have really good sort of ethical use behind what we were doing. But at the same time, the use case is very different to you know, someone sat behind a computer in their shed doing OSINT, ethics might not play a part for those people. But the US model is a very good model. And without coherent policy and without coherent frameworks around AI, but also OSINT, it almost allows a bit of a Wild West. There's places like, or there's teams, groups like Osmosis that are really doing their best to promote efficacy and frameworks and models around OSINT. And I think the more that people jump on board, and it needs a group, but it also then needs a big governmental organization as well as a few private sector sort of clients or whatever it is to jump on board. And then the government. And until it gets that oversight, it's going to be difficult. And the same comes with tooling.
Yep.
Not every tool does everything ethically,
Yeah.
essentially. Um, and in defense, like I say, we towed a very strong ethical line because we had to. But you've got the Regulatory Investigative Powers Act that you need to adhere to in defense because you are a public sort of body. So therefore, and this was one of the biggest things I saw with the analysts when I was in the military was they were having to duplicate everything that they were doing. So they would do their intelligence collection plan. They would go around collecting their intelligence, but then they were also having to audit what they were doing.
Okay.
So everything was taking twice as long. So they'd have to say, I've visited here, I've done this, I've done that. So if you had automatic auditing as part of a tool, and again, like Vidaris does, it absolutely frees up time for your analysts to move on from your collection phase into that analysis phase. And
Yeah.
in that analysis phase, that's obviously where you turn that information into direction, into the strategy that the decision makers need. And like I say, it's within that area there that you really need that governance around the collection and turning it into the analysis phase or the
That's
program.
really well broken down, that Rob. Really well broken down. And you touched on a few key points there around sort of the people involved and the teams that are actually working with OSINT now. And just describe to me like how that actually works then, because obviously there's lots of OSINT providers out there, there's lots of OSINT analysts out there. And just sort of tell me and the audience what are these providers actually doing? What are these teams actually looking at? And 'cause to me, it's like, God, it's a bit of a thankless task in terms of what they're doing, in terms of collating all this information, and shoot, and maybe it's again, I say this naively, but is it a job that AI can take in terms of automating a lot of scraping? But I appreciate that it might not then provide business context on the back end. But yeah, no, Rob, what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, at the end of the day, despite advances with technology and tooling, it is still absolutely a human-led intelligence stream. Um, I think, if you were to build a core OSINT team, if money and sort of expertise was no factor for you, you'd have your data wranglers in there, people that can build these huge data sources, build integrations into whatever tool that you wanted. If you could make your own tool, it would do absolutely everything, right? But you need your data guys behind it or your data people behind it. You then ideally want your regional experts in terms of whatever countries, whatever sort of thematic you're looking at. But then also you've got your experts that aren't regionally, but are sort of kit and equipment and people focused, okay, culture, et cetera, to really understand because in a lot of places, certain words are censored online. So you need to be able to try and understand what is censored, what isn't censored, and what is potentially being discussed, let's say, in a Reddit feed somewhere where someone can't explicitly say the word whatever, but they're now using another word in place of that. So you need to be able to read between the lines as well. And I think that goes hand in glove really with having linguists there. So we had a couple of linguists associated to our team in defense. which was a new model really that we were trialing, and it was absolutely brilliant. It was absolutely brilliant. The amount of additional context, yes, I could almost press like right click translate on whatever, and it would translate it, but you remove all the context. And what an English page says happened in a news story isn't necessarily what is said in the same news story in whatever language it is that they've translated it from.
Mm.
So you've got all these different specialists, and where it falls down, in my opinion, in defense, is everyone moves on every 2 to 3 years. Okay. So every 2 to 3 years, person X leaves, person Y joins. So no one necessarily becomes a subject matter expert in whatever they're doing. That said, in the other more traditional intelligence disciplines that we've obviously mentioned opening, your IMINT, your SIGINT, your HUMINT, etc. There is a designated training school. There is a designated career pipeline. So you can stay within that sphere for a 20-year career. In OSINT, you can't.
Yeah.
So firstly, they need to, and I say professionalize a school of some sort and a career pipeline for those people to go into. Because yes, you can have every collection source under the sun and every tool under the sun doing, automating elements of your job and pulling this, pulling that, etc., etc. But without that open mind behind it and that ability, sometimes you do need to just go and do a bit of a Boolean search on something as opposed to use a tool, or you need to right click view page source to find whatever it is that's hidden behind a web page. There's plenty you can do that free mind that we're teaching these people to use in the military that is still required. Okay, so I don't think better tools or AI is the way to go with this OSINT, especially when it comes to analysis. Analysis is the key part.
Mm.
Um, that's so what, if we do that, what's going to happen and how's that going to be perceived and how is that going to impact, 1, 2, 3 months down the line, but also 4, 5 years down the line.
Yeah.
So yeah, it needs to provide a dedicated training pathway and clear integration into command and control structures with that career pipeline for OSINT from a people and processes front for in my perspective.
No, that's a fantastic point, Rob, and really, really well put as well. And that pretty much brings me to my last question, and it is essentially just my curiosity more than anything, and it was what you touched on about halfway through this podcast, and it was around efficacy and how do Austin teams actually distinguish the difference between freedom of speech on sort of like these social media platforms, and we're allowed to say what we're allowed to say. It is just words, isn't it? I'm saying this all with disclaimers of naivety before they get clipped. Um, but everyone has freedom of speech. But when does it start to be like, okay, we need to intervene here. We need to track this person. This person is a person of interest. They are spreading hate. They are involved in illicit communities. Yeah, they're involved in underground forums, whatever it might be. I know I might have strayed away a little bit from OSINT there, but yeah, my point is around how do you sort of distinguish efficacy concerns around, okay, freedom of speech to put out to the world, and actually that's where it's like that's a step too far. We need to actually reel you in a little bit there.
I think it depends on the organization, right? Because freedom of speech is a very difficult one to start to get involved with. Every country does something differently.
Yep.
Every platform does something differently. What's acceptable, and I say acceptable, what actually people publish online and they deem is acceptable for them to be saying isn't necessarily what they'd say out on the street to you if they saw you in your face.
Mm.
See this more and more. I I still get shocked reading these things, despite everything that I've seen and sort of done. But all this hate speech that comes out to these sports stars that have just been knocked out of Wimbledon, or just won or just lost a particular match, and it it absolutely baffles me. And at the end of the day, there are laws around there about what you say and can and can't do to people, etc. And there is an onus on obviously the social media platforms to do or to screen and to remove and to pull, all this before it is seen by person Y. But there's too many conflicting
Hmm.
elements here that again comes back, I suppose, to frameworks and OSINT guidelines and policies that the US are generally trying to make with those social media platforms at the moment. And we saw it on the news, obviously,
Yeah.
quite a while ago. But I think, would I let my child go on social media? No is the answer. Am I okay being on it? Loosely in the way that I'm on it? Yeah, okay, I'm fine with that. And I suppose it's my job, so I probably need to be online. But um, everyone's risk appetite is very different. Every organization's risk appetite is very different. And I think there's plenty of fantastic tools out there to allow whoever it is, law enforcement, defense, whoever else, to monitor people of interest that they deem to be of interest because they're discussing about proliferation of weapons, whether they're discussing finance flows or money laundering activities, terrorist financing, as well as actual sort of terrorist plots and whatnot, as
Yeah.
well as the disinformation and misinformation space. People just need to be open. They need to try and do what they can to verify sources of information, which is quite difficult. But at the same time, an educational package, I think at a younger age, of how you use the World Wide Web, how you can begin to verify things in school would be a great way to start that.
Yeah.
But you don't necessarily, I don't want to say stop freedom of speech because there's just things that absolutely shouldn't be said. But I suppose on one hand, are you better knowing who you want to target because they say anti this or pro that? Or do you actually want them operating not in the public space where you can see them and can monitor them so that they're operating completely dark and then you don't know who you're monitoring at all? So there's one of those
22,
two
isn't it? It's
sides to
catch
stuff, right?
22. But no, that's been really, really sort of enlightening. I've learned myself quite a bit from you on this podcast today, Rob. So I just wanted to extend massive thanks for obviously giving up your time today. And yeah, if anybody's got any questions for Rob or would like to know a little bit more about Blackdot, I'll be sure to put all the information down below. But Rob, thanks once again for coming on the Security Space podcast.
Cheers, Nick. Thank you so much, mate.